Big news out of Buffalo Trace Distillery. The 2025 Pappy Van Winkle Collection has just been announced, and this year's lineup includes something we've never seen before. Alongside the standard bottles, Buffalo Trace is dropping a 25-year-old Old Rip Van Winkle bourbon from the vault, originally released in 2017. That's right, a 25-year wheated bourbon. A release so rare it might be a once-in-a-lifetime whiskey. Today, I'm breaking down the entire lineup, the history behind it, and how you can actually buy the Old Rip 25 if you're lucky. Before we dive in, welcome back to World of Whiskey. If you're new here, I cover bourbon news, reviews, and the stories behind the bottles we all hunt for. If that sounds like your thing, hit that subscribe button and tap the bell so you don't miss any updates. And while you're here, let me know in the comments which bottle from this year's Pappy lineup would you want the most. Before we get into this year's releases, let's take a quick step back. The Van Winkle story starts with Julian Pappy Van Winkle Sr., who ran the Stitzel-Weller distillery in Louisville. Pappy's innovation, although originally implemented by William LaRue Weller, was using wheat instead of rye in the mash bill, creating a softer, sweeter bourbon that stood apart from the pack. After Stitzel-Weller shut down in 1992, the Van Winkle family kept the brand alive through sourcing and operated out of Old Commonwealth Distillery throughout the 90s. It's insane to think you could walk into many liquor stores back then and find old Stitzel juice just sitting on the shelf. By the early 2000s, they partnered with Buffalo Trace, and that's when the modern Pappy legend really exploded. Celebrity shout-outs, Anthony Bourdain calling it the most magical bourbon and saying that if God made bourbon, it would be Pappy Van Winkle, and skyrocketing secondary prices turned Pappy into bourbon's most coveted unicorn. Fast forward to today, and the annual Pappy release is basically bourbon's Super Bowl, especially when it comes to the raffles. And this year, things just got even bigger. Let's go bottle by bottle through the 2025 Pappy Van Winkle lineup. First up is the Old Rip 10-year, bottled at 107 proof. This is the entry point into the collection. Though calling anything entry point Van Winkle feels almost ridiculous. Expect a big vanilla forward nose, caramel, and baking spice. It's bold, but still approachable. At retail, it's a fantastic bottle, though we all know it doesn't stick around long. While I have enjoyed this bottle when getting the chance to try it, I don't think it's 6 times better than an antique 107 secondary price-wise. Next is Lot B, the 12-year-old Special Reserve. This bottle has a softer profile, often compared to Weller 12, but with an extra layer of complexity. For many fans, this is the sweet spot if you actually want to drink Van Winkle instead of just putting it on a shelf. I personally think this is so similar to Weller 12 that it would be hard for me to justify anything beyond retail. Then there's the Family Reserve Rye, aged 13 years. This is one of the only ryes in the Van Winkle family, and while rye drinkers sometimes overlook it, it's one of the most collectible ryes in the world. Interestingly enough, I think up until 2016, Buffalo Trace was still sourcing the rye to go into this bottle. Of course, now it's all Buffalo Trace distillate. The spice is more muted compared to traditional ryes, thanks to that extra aging. Next is what many bourbon fans call the best of the lineup, Pappy 15. At 107 proof, it hits that balance of bold flavor with just enough oak influence. Notes of leather, cocoa, and rich dark fruit show up here. I think this one is the best out of the lineup because it has the best of all worlds, age, proof, flavor, and just the right amount of oak. Some people argue it outshines the older siblings in terms of pure drinkability. The 20-year steps things up with much more oak. You get leather, tobacco, and heavy caramel notes. It's polarizing. Some love it. Others say it's tipping into over oak territory. I personally enjoy the art that goes into creating a whiskey like this, but it's a little too oak forward for my liking. But either way, it's iconic. Then, of course, the legendary 23-year. This is usually the top of the pyramid, released in a fancy black bag. It's less about day-to-day drinking and more about prestige, but for collectors, it's a crown jewel. This one is my second favorite in the collection. Ironically, when I tried it, I thought it was less oaky than the 20-year. And then we get to the showstopper, the Old Rip 25, a limited edition super rare bourbon that was distilled in 1989 at Stitzel-Weller and was later brought to Buffalo Trace to continue aging. It comes in at 100 proof and only 710 bottles in existence. Very few barrels can even survive that long without turning into oak juice, so the fact that Buffalo Trace is bottling this is wild. Expect deep oak, leather, dark fruit, and layers upon layers of flavor. This release is packaged in a crystal decanter with extremely limited distribution. It's not just bourbon, it's bourbon history in a bottle that I hope one day to try a pour of. That would definitely be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Now let's talk about availability. The standard lineup, 10, 12, 13, 15, 20, and 23, will be distributed the same way they always are, extremely allocated, with most states holding lotteries or raffles to decide who gets them. But the Old Rip 25 is a whole different story. We're talking about a handful of bottles, most likely only available through direct charity lotteries in select state-controlled markets and, of course, auction sites. If you're serious, your best shot is to enter every lottery you can and keep an eye on Buffalo Trace's official announcements. But let's be honest, this bottle is going to disappear instantly. Now, let's address the elephant in the room, the market. At retail, these bottles are priced fairly, usually between $120 for the 10-year and up to around $350 to $400 for the 23-year. But secondary prices, that's where things get crazy. Last year, we saw 15-year bottles go for well over $1,500, 20-year bottles for $2,000 or more, and the 23 pushing $4,000. The 25-year-old Rip, don't be surprised if it hits 5 figures on the secondary market. Here's the real question. Would you drink it or would you hold it as an investment? Personally, I think bourbon is made to be shared with friends and enjoyed, but I can't blame anyone who locks away a bottle that rare, especially actually having the guts to open a bottle worth $15,000 to $20,000. What about you? Let me know in the comments, drink it or keep it. Here's my take. The 10, 15, and 23 are my favorites, but of course, if you can get any close to retail, you would be a fool not to buy them. The 20 and 23 year are more about prestige and collecting, and the Old Rip 25, that's not just a bourbon, that's a museum piece. At the end of the day, the Pappy Van Winkle Collection is about more than just whiskey. It's about legacy, storytelling, and yes, a little bit of hype. But there's no denying that each year Buffalo Trace gives the bourbon world something to chase after, and 2025 might be the biggest chase yet. So that's the full 2025 Pappy Van Winkle Collection, including the surprise appearance of the Old Rip 25-year. Which of these bottles would you want the most? And would you drink that 25-year or keep it sealed? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more bourbon news and reviews right here on World of Whiskey. Until next time, cheers.